Bound by Flame, the Rancher's Trial Among the Apache. Bound by Flame, the Rancher's Trial Among the Apache. The arrow missed Jake Morrison's head by inches, embedding itself in the wooden fence post behind him. He dove behind a water trough as 3 more arrows whistled through the Arizona dust. His ranch hand, Pete Sullivan, was already down, clutching his shoulder where a shaft had torn through muscle. The Apache warriors emerged from the mesquite trees like shadows given form, their painted faces stark against the morning sun. Jake's rifle was in the house, 30 yards away across open ground. His revolver held 6 shots against what looked like a dozen attackers. The ranch had been peaceful for 2 years since the treaty, but something had gone terribly wrong. The lead warrior, a man with lightning bolts painted across his chest, shouted something in Apache and pointed directly at Jake. Pete groaned beside him. Blood seeped between his fingers, darkening the dirt beneath them. Jake fired twice over the trough, not aiming to kill but to buy time. The warriors scattered behind cover, their movements coordinated and precise. These weren't random raiders. This was planned. A woman's scream cut through the chaos. Jake's heart seized. His neighbor, Claire Bennett, had come by that morning to borrow tools. She was trapped in the barn. Another scream, then silence. Jake made his decision. He grabbed Pete under the arms and dragged him toward the smokehouse, the only stone structure that might offer real protection. Bullets and arrows chipped the ground around them. Pete was heavy, dead weight in his panic and pain. They tumbled through the smokehouse door just as a flaming arrow struck the barn roof. Dry timber and old hay, Jake thought. Claire had minutes. Through a crack in the stone wall, Jake watched the Apache warrior with the lightning bolts gesture to his men, half move toward the burning barn. The rest advanced on the smokehouse. This wasn't about land or cattle. Something else drove them, something fierce and personal in their movements. Jake reloaded his revolver with shaking hands. Pete was fading, his breathing shallow. The heat from the burning barn pressed against the smokehouse walls. Smoke began filtering through the gaps in the stone. They were being cooked out. Then he saw her. Claire burst from the barn side door, her dress smoking, coughing as she ran. An Apache warrior moved to intercept her, but the lightning bolt warrior barked an order. The man stopped. Claire stumbled and fell near the well, gasping for air. The lightning bolt warrior walked toward her slowly, deliberately. He wasn't going to kill her. He pulled her to her feet, speaking rapidly in Apache. Claire's eyes went wide with something that wasn't quite fear. Recognition, maybe? She looked toward the smokehouse, toward Jake, and shook her head slowly. A warning. The warrior called out in broken English. His voice carried authority and rage in equal measure. Jake Morrison, you come out. You face judgment. The woman lives. You hide. Everyone burns. Pete grabbed Jake's arm with his good hand. Don't. It's a trap. But Jake was already thinking about Claire's face, about Pete's wound, about the fire spreading from the barn to the bunkhouse. The Apache hadn't attacked at dawn for cattle or horses. They'd come for him specifically. Someone had told them his name. The smokehouse door was oak, heavy and secure. It would buy him minutes to think, but minutes wouldn't solve this. The ranch was isolated, 10 miles from the nearest town. No help was coming. Whatever judgment the Apache warrior spoke of, it was happening now. Jake looked at his revolver. 4 shots left. He looked at Pete, at the blood pooling beneath him. Through the crack, he watched Claire standing beside the well, the warrior's hand on her shoulder. Not threatening, but claiming. The other Apache had formed a semicircle around the smokehouse, weapons ready but not attacking. They were waiting. This was about more than a morning raid. This was about something Jake had done or failed to do, something that demanded an answer. He stood, holstering his revolver. Pete tried to protest, but Jake pushed past him and opened the door. The heat hit him first, waves of it from the burning barn, then the eyes of a dozen warriors fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The lightning bolt warrior released Claire and stepped forward. Up close, Jake could see the man was older than he'd thought, with scars that told stories of many battles. You are Jake Morrison, the warrior said. It wasn't a question. I am. 2 moons ago, your cattle crossed the treaty line. They destroyed our sacred ground, the place where my father's bones rest. Jake's mind raced. 2 months back during the drought, he'd opened the southern pasture, but he'd been careful to stay on his side of the boundary markers. Unless someone had moved them. I didn't know, Jake said. The markers showed clear land. The warrior's hand moved to the knife at his belt. Ignorance is not innocence. The spirits are restless. My people demand balance. Blood for desecration. Claire spoke up, her voice steady despite the ash on her face. His neighbor moved the markers. Frank Hudson wanted Morrison's land, wanted him dead or driven off. He told me last week, bragging while drunk. The warrior's eyes narrowed. You speak truth? I swear it. Lightning bolts turned back to Jake. Then you are caught between two enemies. Your own kind who betrays you, and my people who seek justice. What will you do, rancher? Jake felt the weight of every decision he'd never wanted to make pressing down on him. The morning sun climbed higher, and the barn collapsed in a shower of sparks behind them. The Apache warriors stood motionless, waiting for Jake Morrison's answer. Around them, the other warriors held their weapons ready, but made no move to attack. The burning barn cast dancing shadows across the dirt yard, and smoke rose in thick columns toward the cloudless sky. Pete Sullivan's labored breathing echoed from inside the smokehouse. Claire Bennett stood near the well, her dress torn and singed, watching Jake with desperate eyes that pleaded for him to choose wisely. Jake's mind worked through the facts quickly. Frank Hudson owned the ranch to the west, a bitter man who'd wanted to expand his holdings for years. Jake had refused to sell even when Hudson offered twice the land's value. Moving boundary markers was exactly the kind of underhanded move Hudson would make, but proving it to the Apache wouldn't save Jake's life right now. The sacred ground was desecrated whether Jake knew about it or not. What justice do your people demand? Jake asked. The warrior with lightning bolts on his chest, whose name Jake didn't know, tilted his head slightly. You ask what we want, not what you will give. This is wisdom or cowardice. I have not decided which. I'm asking what's right. A thin smile crossed the warrior's face. Right is different for your people and mine. Your people see land as something to own. We see it as something that owns us. Your cattle scattered the bones of my father. They trampled the offerings my family left for his spirit journey. This is not theft of property. This is violation of the sacred. Jake understood then. This wasn't about money or land borders. This was about desecration of a burial site. In Apache culture, disturbing the dead was among the gravest offenses. No wonder they'd come with such fury. If I'd known your father's resting place was there, I would never have let my cattle near it, Jake said carefully. I respect the sacred. My own father is buried on this land. I know what it means to honor the dead. The warrior's eyes flickered with something, recognition perhaps. Words are wind. What will you do to restore balance? Tell me how. Lightning bolts stepped closer. His warriors tensed but didn't interfere. Among my people, when sacred ground is violated, the guilty must endure trial by fire and earth. You must prove your worth to the spirits. Prove you are not just a man who destroys what he doesn't understand. Jake glanced at the burning barn. Trial by fire? You want me to walk into that? No. Our fire. Our terms. You will come to our camp. You will face the judgment of our elders and our spirits. If you survive 3 days of trials, the balance is restored. If you fail, your blood feeds the earth where my father's bones lie. Claire gasped. That's murder. You can't ask him to do that. The warrior turned to her. We ask nothing. We demand what is owed. Your law says a man must answer for his crimes. This is our law. The rancher chooses, live as a coward who runs, or face justice as a man of honor. Pete called weakly from the smokehouse. Jake, don't. They'll kill you either way. But Jake was thinking about the alternative. If he refused, the Apache would burn his ranch, kill his hands, and probably kill him anyway. Running meant abandoning everything he'd built, leaving Pete to die and living with the shame. Going with them was dangerous, but it was a chance. A slim one, but still a chance. If I go with you and survive your trials, it ends here. No more attacks on my ranch or my people. The sacred ground gets proper respect, and we find a way to mark it clearly so no one else violates it. Lightning bolts considered this. If you survive, yes, the spirits will have judged you worthy. But know this, Jake Morrison. Many have faced the trials. Few return. The fire burns hot. The earth tests deep. You will wish for death before the third day ends. Jake's throat went dry, but he kept his voice steady. When do we leave? Now. Your wounded man stays. The woman tends him. If you try to escape, if your people follow us, we kill them both and burn everything you own. Understand? I understand. Claire rushed forward, grabbing Jake's arm. You can't do this. Let me ride to town, get the marshal, get help. Jake met her eyes. By the time help arrives, everyone here is dead. This is the only way. You don't even know if you can trust them.
I don't.
But I know I can't trust Frank Hudson, and I know this land has seen enough blood already.
He turned to lightning bolts.
I need to get Pete inside the house, somewhere safer than the smokehouse. Give me that much. The warrior nodded curtly. Jake and two of the Apache warriors lifted Pete, who groaned but stayed conscious, and carried him into the main house. They laid him on Jake's own bed. Claire followed, tearing cloth for bandages. Keep pressure on the wound, Jake told her. There's whiskey in the kitchen cabinet for cleaning it. Pete knows where I keep the emergency money. Use what you need to get the doctor from town. Jake, take care of him, Claire. And when you see Frank Hudson, tell him I know what he did. Tell him if I come back, we're settling this. He didn't wait for her response. Outside, the Apache warriors had gathered their horses. One brought forward a paint mare for Jake. No saddle, just a woven blanket. Jake mounted awkwardly. He hadn't ridden bareback since he was a boy. Lightning bolts swung onto his own horse with fluid grace. We ride hard. Keep up or be left behind. They rode south, away from the burning barn and the ranch Jake had spent 5 years building. The morning sun climbed higher, beating down on them with relentless heat. The Apache moved like they were part of the horses, flowing with the animals rather than controlling them. Jake struggled to match their pace, his legs already aching from gripping the mare's sides. After an hour of hard riding, they entered rougher country. The flat ranchland gave way to rocky hills and steep arroyos. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, and the ground turned from dirt to stone. Jake had never been this far into Apache territory. Few white men had and lived to describe it. They stopped once to water the horses at a hidden spring. Jake dismounted stiffly, his legs trembling. Lightning bolts watched him with an unreadable expression. You are not used to real riding, the warrior observed. I'm a rancher, not a cavalryman. You will learn, or you will fall. Either way, we do not slow for you. They rode on. The sun reached its peak, turning the desert into a furnace. Sweat soaked through Jake's shirt. His throat burned with thirst, but no one offered him water. This was part of the test, he realized. Everything from this moment forward was a test. By late afternoon, they reached a canyon with steep red walls. The Apache led their horses down a narrow trail that seemed to disappear against the rock face. Jake's mare picked her way carefully over loose stones. One wrong step would send them tumbling hundreds of feet down. At the canyon bottom, a village appeared. Wickiups made of branches and grass dotted the area near a stream. Women looked up from their work, children stopped playing, and old men sitting in the shade studied Jake with hard eyes. This was different from the Apache camps Jake had seen near towns. This was untouched, traditional, a place where the old ways still ruled. Lightning bolts dismounted and spoke rapidly in Apache to an elder who approached. The old man's face was a map of wrinkles, his hair completely white. He looked at Jake with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. The conversation continued for several minutes, heated at times, but eventually the elder nodded. Come, Lightning Bolt said to Jake. The council will see you now. They led him to a larger structure at the center of the village. Inside, smoke from a fire filled the air. 5 elders sat in a semicircle, 3 men and 2 women, all ancient and weathered. Lightning Bolt spoke to them, gesturing occasionally toward Jake. When he finished, one of the women spoke. Lightning Bolts translated. She says you have the eyes of a man who knows loss. She asks if you fear death. Jake thought about lying, about trying to seem brave. But something in the old woman's gaze demanded truth. Yes, I fear it, but I fear dishonor more. The translation brought nods from several elders. Another spoke, an old man with a scar across his blind left eye. He asks what you know of our ways. Not enough, Jake admitted. I know you honor the land, the spirits of your ancestors, and the bonds between your people. I know you value courage and honesty above wealth. Beyond that, I am ignorant. More nodding. The blind-eyed elder spoke again at length. Lightning Bolts listened, then turned to Jake. He says ignorance can be forgiven if it is willing to become knowledge. You did not know the sacred ground, and perhaps this is true. But whether you meant the violation or not, it happened. The spirits do not care about intent. They care about balance. You have caused imbalance. You must restore it. The trials begin at sunset. 3 challenges across, 3 days in. Fail any one, and you die. Succeed in all 3, and you are judged worthy. The first trial is fire. You will walk through flames that represent purification. If the spirits accept you, you will emerge. If not, you will burn. Do you understand? Jake's mouth went dry. I understand. Do you accept? Every instinct screamed at him to run, to fight, to do anything but agree to walk into fire. But Pete's bleeding body flashed in his mind. Claire's frightened face, the burning barn. Frank Hudson's treachery. If Jake ran now, it all meant nothing. Everyone suffered for Hudson's greed and Jake's ignorance. I accept. The elders rose and filed out of the structure. Lightning Bolt studied Jake for a long moment. You may have courage, rancher. But courage is not enough. The spirits demand more. They demand transformation. Are you ready to become something other than what you are? Jake didn't know how to answer that, so he said nothing. As sunset approached, the village gathered in a clearing. Warriors built a corridor of fire, 20 feet long, flames rising 6 feet high on either side, fed by mesquite wood and something else that made them burn with unusual intensity. The heat was overwhelming even from 30 feet away. Lightning bolts approached Jake, carrying a clay bowl filled with dark liquid. Drink! It will help with the pain. Jake sniffed it. Bitter herbs and something metallic. He drank it down, nearly gagging on the taste. Within moments his senses sharpened. Colors became more vivid. Sounds grew clearer. The fire seemed alive, writhing and reaching for him. The sacred medicine opens your spirit to the trial, Lightning Bolts explained. Without it, you would only burn. With it, the spirits can judge you truly. Walk through the fire. Do not run. Do not hesitate. Walk with purpose and confidence. If you doubt, you die. The old woman from the council stepped forward and began to chant. Others joined her, their voices rising and falling in rhythms Jake didn't understand but felt in his chest. The fire corridor pulsed with the chanting, flames dancing higher. Lightning bolts pushed Jake forward. It is time. Jake approached the fire. Heat washed over him in waves. His skin felt like it was already burning. The medicine in his blood made his heart race, his vision swim. He could see faces in the flames. His father's face. Pete's. Claire's. Men he'd fought beside in the war. All of them watching, judging, waiting. He took the first step into the fire. The pain was instant and total. It felt like his entire body was being torn apart, but beneath the pain something else stirred, a coldness that fought against the heat. The medicine, maybe? Or something deeper. Jake forced himself to take another step, then another. The flames licked at his clothes but didn't catch. They wrapped around his arms but didn't consume. The faces in the fire spoke without words. They asked him questions he couldn't voice but somehow understood. Why did you come here? What makes you worthy? What will you sacrifice for balance? Jake had no answers, only instinct. He walked forward because stopping meant death. He walked forward because he'd given his word. He walked forward because somewhere beyond the fire, Pete and Claire were counting on him to survive. The chanting grew louder. The flames rose higher, completely engulfing him. Jake couldn't see anything but fire now, couldn't feel anything but burning. His lungs screamed for air. His eyes watered and blurred. He stumbled but kept moving. One foot in front of the other. One step, then another. Just when he thought his legs would give out, cool air touched his face. He burst through the far end of the fire corridor and collapsed onto bare earth. Hands grabbed him, rolling him to smother any flames. Water splashed over him. Voices spoke rapidly in Apache, urgent but not panicked. Jake lay on his back, staring up at stars that seemed impossibly bright. His skin felt raw and tight, but when he lifted his hands to look, there were no burns, no blisters, only redness like a severe sunburn. His clothes were singed but intact. Lightning bolts appeared above him, silhouetted against the darkening sky. The spirits have allowed you to pass. The fire accepts you. You rest tonight. Tomorrow, the second trial begins. They carried Jake to a small wickiup at the edge of the village. Inside, they laid him on soft furs. A young woman brought him water and a paste that smelled of herbs. She applied it to his reddened skin with gentle hands, speaking softly in Apache. The paste cooled the burning sensation almost immediately. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness. The medicine still flowed through his veins, bringing strange dreams. He saw the desert as it had been before white men came. Herds of buffalo stretching to the horizon, Apache riding free across endless land. He saw battles and death, treaties made and broken, families torn apart. When he woke fully, dawn light filtered through the wickiup entrance. His body ached like he'd been trampled by horses, but he was alive. The young woman who'd tended him the night before sat nearby, working on a piece of beadwork. She noticed him stirring and brought more water. "Thank you," Jake said. She didn't respond. Probably didn't speak English, but she smiled slightly before leaving. Jake tested his limbs carefully. Everything worked, though painfully. He stood, his legs shaking, and walked outside. The village was already active. Women prepared food over fires, children ran between wickiups, men worked on weapons and tools. Lightning bolts approached. You survived the first trial. This is good. But do not celebrate yet. Today's trial is Earth. You will be buried alive in sacred ground. If you can commune with the spirits of the dead, if they accept your presence, you will be dug out at sunset. If they reject you, the Earth will claim you forever. Jake felt his stomach drop. Being burned alive was one kind of terror. Being buried alive was another entirely. How deep? Deep enough that you cannot dig yourself out. Deep enough that calling for help will not be heard. Deep enough that the spirits of those who rest there can judge you without interference from the living world. They fed him sparingly, just corn mush and water. Then lightning bolts led him up a trail out of the canyon to a mesa top. The land here was different, sacred in a way Jake could feel, even without understanding why. Rocks stood in deliberate arrangements. The earth itself seemed to hum with something ancient. In the center of the mesa was a hole, freshly dug, 6 feet deep and barely wide enough for a man. A grave, Jake realized. They were putting him in a grave. The elders were already there, seated around the hole in a circle. They began chanting as lightning bolts gestured for Jake to climb down. At the bottom of the hole, the earth was cool and damp. It smelled of minerals and age. "Lie down," lightning bolts instructed. "Close your eyes. Do not fight what comes. The spirits will test you, your fear, your regret, your worthiness. Accept their judgment." Jake lay down in the narrow grave, staring up at the circle of sky above him. The elders' faces appeared at the rim, looking down at him. Then they began shoveling earth into the hole. The first shovelful hit Jake's chest, making him flinch. Then more came, covering his legs, his torso, his arms. He forced himself to stay calm, to breathe slowly even as panic rose in his throat. The earth was cold and heavy, pressing down on him with terrible weight. They left his face clear until the last moment. Lightning bolts looked down at him one final time. "Remember, do not fight. Accept." Then earth covered his face, and Jake Morrison was buried alive in Apache sacred ground. Darkness. Complete and absolute. The weight of the earth pressed down from all sides, constricting his chest, making each breath a struggle. Jake fought against the panic that clawed at his mind, trying to remember lightning bolts' words. Accept. Fight. But every instinct screamed at him to dig, to claw his way up, to escape the suffocating darkness. His heart hammered against his ribs. The air in the tiny pocket around his face grew thick and stale. How long could he survive like this? An hour? Less? The Apache said until sunset, but that was hours away. He would suffocate long before then, unless that was the point. Unless dying and being reborn was part of the trial. Jake forced himself to stop struggling, to let his body go limp. He slowed his breathing, taking shallow sips of air instead of desperate gulps. The panic didn't disappear, but he pushed it to the edges of his consciousness. In the darkness and silence, other things began to emerge. He heard voices, or felt them. Not words exactly, but impressions, emotions, memories that weren't his own. An old man's pride in his warrior sons.
A woman's grief over a child lost to sickness.
A young brave's excitement before his first hunt. These were the spirits of those buried in the sacred ground, Jake realized. They were showing him their lives, testing whether he could understand, whether he could respect their stories. He saw through other eyes. A vast desert before fences carved it into pieces, buffalo herds that took days to pass, Apache bands moving with the seasons, free and strong. Then came the changes. White soldiers in blue uniforms, battles fought and lost, treaties signed and broken. Families forced onto reservations, children taken to distant schools, old ways forbidden by new laws. The spirits showed him their anger and their sorrow. They showed him what had been taken, what could never be returned. Jake felt it all, the weight of it heavier than the earth pressing down on his chest. He understood then why his cattle-trampling burial grounds was more than property damage. It was another violation in a long chain of violations, another reminder that nothing was sacred to the invaders, not even the dead. Forgive me, Jake thought, not sure if the spirits could hear his mind. I didn't know. I should have asked. Should have learned, should have respected your land instead of assuming it was mine to use. The impressions shifted. He saw his own ranch through different eyes. His cattle grazing where Apache families once camped. His fences blocking ancient trails. His water rights claiming springs that had served the people for generations. He'd thought he was just a man trying to build a life. But from the spirit's perspective, he was another conqueror, another taker. But then something else. A memory of lightning bolts as a young man standing with Jake's father at the edge of a creek. They were talking, trading, finding common ground. Jake's father had given blankets and medicine when Lightning Bolt's sister was sick. Lightning Bolts had warned Jake's father of bandits planning to raid his cattle. There had been respect between them once, however brief. The spirits were showing Jake that they remembered. His father had tried to live honorably on this land, had tried to coexist. They were asking if Jake would do the same, or if he was different from his father. I want to be like him, Jake thought. I want to find a way to live here that doesn't erase you. The weight on his chest seemed to ease slightly. The air felt fresher, though. Logically, that was impossible under 6 feet of earth. The voices grew quieter, not hostile now, but watchful. Waiting, time lost meaning. Jake drifted in darkness that felt less like a grave and more like a womb. He thought about his choices, the paths that had led him here. The war he'd fought, thinking he was preserving the Union. The ranch he'd built, thinking he was building a future. The boundaries he'd drawn, thinking they meant something. All of it seemed smaller now, less significant. The earth was patient. The earth endured. Men came and went, drew their lines and built their empires, and the earth swallowed them all eventually. The only thing that mattered was whether you lived with honor, whether you respected what came before, and considered what came after. A new sensation broke through his contemplation. Movement. Vibration through the earth. Ha 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 ha. Digging. Someone was excavating the grave. Sunset, Jake realized. He'd survived. Light stabbed through the darkness as earth was cleared from his face. Jake gasped, sucking in fresh air that tasted sweeter than anything he'd ever known. Hands reached down, grabbing his arms, pulling him up out of the hole. He emerged covered in dirt, blinking in the orange light of late afternoon sun. Lightning bolts stood before him, studying Jake's face with intense scrutiny. What did the spirits show you? Jake's voice came out rough and dry. They showed me what was lost, what I didn't know I was taking. They showed me my father and yours and the respect they had for each other. They asked me if I would honor that respect. And what did you answer? I said yes. Lightning bolts nodded slowly. The spirits accepted you. You are still here, but the final trial awaits. Tomorrow we test your body and your will together. Many who survive fire and earth fall to the trial of water and blood. Rest tonight. Regain your strength. You will need all of it. They led Jake back down to the village, supporting him when his legs wobbled. His body felt strange, disconnected, as if part of him was still buried in the sacred ground. The young woman from before brought him food, real food this time, rabbit and corn and something sweet made from cactus fruit. Jake ate ravenously, his hunger suddenly overwhelming. That night he slept deeply, dreamlessly, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. When he woke, the sun was already climbing towards its peak. He'd slept through the entire morning. He emerged from the wiki-up to find the village preparing for something. Warriors painted their faces and checked their weapons. Women wove fresh baskets and prepared bundles of supplies. Lightning bolts appeared, dressed differently than before. He wore ceremonial paint and carried a lance decorated with feathers and beads. Today you face the final trial, water and blood. You will run the canyon course, from here to the Great Falls 5 miles north. You'll run without stopping, without slowing. Warriors will pursue you, testing you, pushing you beyond what you think you can endure. If you reach the falls and dive from the sacred cliff into the pool below, you complete the trial. If you fail, if you stop, if you cannot make the dive, you are not worthy. Jake's legs still ached from the burial. His lungs felt tight. 5 miles? 5 miles through terrain that would challenge a mountain goat, uphill, downhill, across loose rock and narrow paths, and the warriors chasing you will not be gentle. They will strike at you with sticks and stones, testing your pain tolerance, your determination. This is the trial that breaks most men. Fire tests the spirit. Earth tests the mind. Water and blood tests everything. They gave Jake a pouch of water and nothing else. No shoes beyond his worn boots. No shirt, just his bare chest marked now with ritual symbols painted by the elders. Lightning bolts walked him to the starting point, a marker stone at the canyon's southern end. When I sound the horn, you run. Count to 100, then we follow. The spirits go with you, rancher. Prove yourself worthy of their blessing. Jake positioned himself at the marker, his muscles coiling in anticipation. His heart raced, but differently than before. Not panic now, but focus. He'd survived fire. He'd survived earth. He would survive this. The horn blast split the air, a long, mournful sound that echoed off the canyon walls. Jake ran. The first mile was deceptive. The ground was relatively flat, packed earth that gave good footing. Jake found his rhythm quickly, his rancher's legs used to walking long distances, adjusting to the running pace. The canyon walls rose steep and red on either side, creating a corridor that funneled the morning breeze. He could hear his breathing, his footfalls, and behind him, growing closer, the war cries of pursuing Apache warriors. They'd finished counting. The chase had begun. Jake pushed harder, his boots pounding the earth. The path began to climb, winding up the canyon wall on a trail barely wider than his shoulders. Loose rocks skittered under his feet. One wrong step would send him tumbling down. He didn't look back, focusing entirely on the path ahead, on finding the safest route upward. A stone struck his shoulder blade, hard enough to make him stumble. The warriors were in range. Another stone hit his calf, pain shooting up his leg. They were hurting him, forcing him to take the harder, steeper route. Jake gritted his teeth and climbed faster. The path leveled out briefly on a mesa top. Jake's lungs burned. Sweat poured down his face despite the morning cool. He risked a glance back and saw at least 6 warriors, all younger and faster than him, gaining ground. One held a long stick, another a leather whip. He ran. The mesa ended abruptly, the path diving down into a narrow ravine choked with boulders and thorn bushes. Jake half ran, half slid down the slope, thorns tearing at his arms and torso. Blood mixed with sweat and dirt. Behind him, the warriors followed with impossible agility, barely slowed by terrain that nearly defeated Jake. A stick cracked across his back. Another strike hit his ribs. They were close enough to touch him now, deliberately inflicting pain to test his resolve. Jake roared, anger and determination mixing, and pushed through the ravine into a dry creek bed. The creek bed offered better footing, but no cover. The warriors spread out, surrounding him on 3 sides, forcing him to run straight ahead toward a rock wall that seemed impassable. At the last moment, Jake spotted a crack in the stone, barely wide enough for a man. He squeezed through, sharp edges scraping his shoulders. The warriors couldn't follow as quickly, buying him precious seconds. On the other side, the terrain changed again. The path now followed a ridge with steep drops on either side. One misstep meant death. Jake focused on each footfall, on maintaining balance, on not letting fatigue overcome his concentration. His legs trembled, his vision blurred with sweat and exhaustion. 2 miles, maybe. Halfway. But could he maintain this pace for another 3 miles?
A warrior burst from the crack in the stone, faster than the others.
He was young, painted with symbols Jake didn't recognize, and he carried a whip that cracked through the air like thunder. The leather caught Jake's shoulder, wrapping around it, the warrior yanking hard. Jake stumbled, nearly fell, caught himself at the edge of the drop. He grabbed the whip, ignoring the burn as it cut his hands, and pulled back hard. The warrior wasn't expecting resistance. He lurched forward, releasing the whip to regain his balance. Jake ran. The ridge path descended toward a river, the first water he'd seen in the canyon system. This had to be getting close to the falls. He could hear rushing water ahead, a roar that grew louder with each step. His boots splashed through shallow water at the river's edge, cooling his burning feet briefly. The warriors regrouped behind him, 5 of them now working together to cut off any escape routes. They drove him upstream, toward the roar of the falls. The river grew deeper, faster, the current tugging at Jake's legs as he ran through knee-deep water. The bank was too steep and overgrown to use, forcing him to stay in the water. Ahead, mist rose from where the river disappeared over a cliff edge. The falls. The sacred falls. Jake's goal and possibly his death, he'd have to dive from the top, trusting that the pool below was deep enough that the spirits would guide him safely. The warriors closed in, forcing him toward the cliff edge. Jake reached the lip of the falls and looked down. 70 feet, maybe more. The pool below churned white with the impact of falling water. How deep was it? Were there rocks hidden beneath the surface? A stick struck the back of his knees, collapsing his legs. Jake fell to his hands and knees at the edge of the cliff, gasping. The young warrior with the whip stood over him, raising a stone club. Not to kill, Jake realized, but to force a choice. surrender or jump. Jake looked down at the churning water. He thought about Pete bleeding in his ranch house, about Claire facing whatever aftermath his absence had created, about Frank Hudson's treachery going unpunished, about lightning bolts and the spirits in the earth and the fire he'd walked through. He'd come too far to quit now. Jake threw himself forward, over the edge, into empty air. The fall lasted forever and no time at all. Wind tore at him. The roar of the falls consumed all other sound. The churning pool rushed up to meet him. He hit the water feet first, driving deep, the impact stunning him like a physical blow. The current grabbed him, tumbling him, disorienting him. He couldn't tell which way was up. His lungs screamed for air. Panic threatened to overwhelm him again, but he forced it down, let his body's natural buoyancy guide him. He broke the surface, gasping, and swam weakly toward the calmer water at the pool's edge. Hands reached down, grabbing his arms, hauling him onto a smooth rock. Jake lay on his back, chest heaving, unable to move. He was alive. He'd completed the trial. Lightning bolts appeared above him, but he was smiling now, a genuine expression that transformed his stern features. You've done what few outsiders have ever done. You have faced the 3 trials and emerged worthy. The spirits accept you. The balance is restored. Jake could barely process the words. His body was one massive ache, cuts and bruises covering every inch of exposed skin. But alive. Still alive. They carried him back to the village on a litter made of branches and hide. The entire community turned out to witness his return. The elders met him with solemn nods of approval. Children stared at him with wide, curious eyes. Women brought water and medicine, tending to his wounds with the same care they'd show their own warriors. That evening, as the sun set over the canyon, they held a ceremony. Jake sat in a place of honor, still barely able to move, while the elders spoke in Apache and lightning bolts translated key passages. They declared him a friend to the people, a man who had proven himself through suffering and courage. They gave him a new name in their language, something that lightning bolts translated as walks through fire. You have earned the right to live on this land, lightning bolts said. But more than that, you have earned understanding. You know now what you didn't know before. The land is not just dirt and grass. It holds spirits and memory. Your cattle can graze, but not where the sacred grounds lie. We will mark these places clearly, teach you our boundaries, and you will teach your neighbor, the one who moved the markers, that some things cannot be stolen. Jake found his voice, rough but determined. Frank Hudson will answer for what he did, I promise you that. Good. But this is not just about one bad man. This is about all your people learning to live with respect. We cannot go back to what was. Too much has changed. But we can go forward differently. Will you help us do this? I will. Lightning bolts clasped Jake's shoulder, careful of the fresh wounds. Then rest, walks through fire. Tomorrow we will take you back to your ranch. But you will return to visit us. You will help bridge the gap between our peoples. This is not the end of your trial. It is the beginning of your true work. Jake slept that night in the wickiup, his body slowly healing, his mind processing everything he'd experienced. The fire, the earth, the water, the spirits in their judgment, the understanding that had been beaten and burned and buried into him. He was not the same man who'd left his ranch 3 days ago. That man had been ignorant, despite good intentions. This man understood the weight of his presence on this land, the responsibility it carried. In the morning, they prepared horses for the journey back. Jake could barely walk, let alone ride, but he forced himself upright, determined not to show weakness now. The young woman who tended him brought a final bowl of medicine, something that dulled the pain and cleared his head. She spoke to lightning bolts in Apache, gesturing toward Jake. Lightning bolts smiled. She says you have strong spirit for a white man. She offers you her favor, should you ever need aid from our people. Jake bowed his head to her respectfully. Thank you for everything. The ride back was slower, mindful of Jake's condition. Lightning bolts and 3 other warriors accompanied him, carrying the official markers that would designate the sacred grounds. They reached Jake's ranch by midday. The burned barn was a skeleton of charred timbers. The bunkhouse still stood, smoke-stained but intact. Pete emerged from the main house, his arm in a sling but alive and moving. Jake! Pete's face split into a grin. We thought, hell, we didn't know what to think. Claire appeared behind him, relief washing over her features. Thank God. We've been terrified. Jake dismounted carefully, every movement sending fresh pain through his battered body. I'm back. It's done. The Apache and I have an understanding now. Lightning Bolts and his warriors set about placing the markers, driving tall posts into the ground at the sacred site boundaries. Each post was carved with symbols, visible from distance, impossible to miss. When they finished, Lightning Bolts approached Jake one final time. The debt is paid, but the balance is restored. But remember your promise. Yor walks through fire now. Act like a man worthy of that name. I will. The Apache rode away, disappearing into the desert as suddenly as they'd appeared 3 days ago. Jake watched them go, then turned to face Claire and Pete. There's something I need to do, he said. Pete, you up for a ride? Where? Frank Hudson's ranch. It's time we had a conversation. Claire's eyes flashed with anger. That bastard nearly got you killed. Exactly. Which is why I need to deal with him before this gets any worse. They saddled horses, though Jake could barely manage it with his injuries. The three of them rode west toward Hudson's property, a larger spread than Jake's with a fancy house that spoke of money and ambition. Hudson himself was on the porch, drinking whiskey despite the early hour. He saw them coming and set down his glass, his hand moving toward the rifle leaning against the wall. That's far enough, Morrison, Hudson called out. You're not welcome here. Jake stopped his horse 30 feet from the porch, close enough to talk, far enough to react if Hudson went for the rifle. We need to talk about boundary markers, Frank, and about Apache sacred grounds. Hudson's face went carefully neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You moved the markers on my southern property line. You knew my cattle would cross into Apache sacred ground. You wanted to start a war that would drive me off my land or get me killed. That's a lie. You got any proof? Claire spoke up, her voice sharp as broken glass. You told me yourself, Frank. Remember? 3 weeks ago at the general store, bragging about how you'd found a way to expand your holdings without spending a dime. You said Morrison was too stupid to notice the markers had been moved? Hudson's face darkened. You're making that up? Am I? Because I told this same story to the Apache warriors who showed up at Jake's ranch. And I'll tell it to the marshal when he comes through next week. And I'll tell it to every rancher and farmer at the next town meeting. By the time I'm done, everyone will know what kind of man you are, Frank Hudson. Jake watched Hudson's hand creep closer to the rifle. I wouldn't, Jake said quietly. You might get one of us. But the Apache are watching. They know what you did. You make this worse, and they won't be as patient as they were with me. I survived their trials. You think you'd do the same? Hudson's hand stopped. Fear flickered across his face, quickly hidden but not quickly enough. What do you want? I want you to leave the boundary markers alone. I want you to respect the sacred ground markers the Apache just placed. And I want you to know that if anything else happens on my ranch, anything suspicious, anything that smells like your handiwork, I'm coming back here, and I won't be alone. You threatening me? I'm making you a promise. Live honest and we have no problems. Keep playing your games, and you'll find out exactly how serious the Apache take their sacred grounds. Hudson stared at Jake for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded curtly. Fine, but stay off my land, Morrison. And keep your people from spreading lies about me. They're not lies, Frank. And you know it. They rode away, leaving Hudson on his porch with his whiskey and his schemes. Jake knew the man wouldn't change, not really. Men like Hudson never did, but at least now he'd think twice before trying anything else. The threat of Apache retribution was real enough to give any man pause. Back at the ranch, Claire insisted on examining Jake's wounds properly. She peeled away the dried mud and herbs the Apache had applied, revealing the full extent of his injuries. Burns from the fire, cuts and scrapes from being buried, bruises and welts from the canyon run. His body was a map of suffering. You should have died, Claire said softly, cleaning a particularly nasty gash on his arm. Any normal man would have died. I nearly did. Several times. But the Apache, they didn't want to kill me. They wanted to transform me. Test me. Make me understand something I'd been too ignorant to see before. And did you understand? Jake thought about the spirits in the earth, the visions in the fire, the water that had nearly drowned him and then given him rebirth. I understand now. This land doesn't belong to me. I belong to it. And I have a responsibility to respect what came before me, what will come after. The Apache aren't the enemy. Ignorance is. Greed is. Men like Frank Hudson, who see the land as just something to exploit. Pete, listening from his chair by the fire, spoke up. So what now? We rebuild the barn and pretend none of this happened? We rebuild the barn, Jake agreed, but we don't pretend anything.
We learn the Apache boundaries. We establish real peace, not just absence of war.
And we make sure other ranchers know about the sacred grounds, so no one else makes my mistake. Over the following weeks, Jake kept his promise. He visited the Apache village twice more, bringing gifts of cattle and tools, learning more of their language and customs. Lightning bolts became something like a friend, the respect between them growing as they worked together to mark and protect the sacred sites. Other ranchers were skeptical at first. Some accused Jake of being an Apache sympathizer, but when he explained what had happened, when they saw the ceremonial scars he now bore and heard about the trials, most came around. Fear of Apache retribution was a powerful motivator, but beyond that, many were good men who genuinely hadn't known about the sacred grounds. Jake became a bridge between the two communities, exactly as lightning bolts had predicted. Claire remained a constant presence at the ranch, helping with the rebuilding, tending to Pete's healing shoulder, and gradually becoming more than just a neighbor. She and Jake never discussed it explicitly, but there was an understanding between them now, a bond forged in the fire and fear of those terrible days. The new barn rose quickly, with help from neighboring ranchers. Jake made sure to consult with lightning bolts before choosing the location, ensuring it didn't encroach on any disputed ground. The Apache warriors even helped with some of the heavy lifting, an unprecedented cooperation that set tongues wagging throughout the territory. Frank Hudson kept his distance, which suited Jake fine. Jake knew the man was still scheming, still plotting ways to expand his holdings. Some men could only see the world in terms of what they could take. Hudson would make another move eventually, but when he did, Jake would be ready. And he wouldn't be alone. 6 months after the trials, the territorial governor visited the region. He'd heard about the unprecedented peace between the ranchers and Apache, and he wanted to see it himself. Jake and Lightning Bolts met with him together, explaining the boundary system they'd established, the mutual respect they'd built. The governor was impressed enough to propose formal treaties that would protect the sacred grounds in exchange for guaranteed peace. Not everyone was happy with the arrangement. Some settlers wanted all Apache removed to reservations. Some Apache warriors wanted to fight rather than negotiate. But Jake and Lightning Bolts stood firm, arguing that this path offered something better than endless conflict. Slowly, gradually, more people on both sides came around. The night before the governor left, Jake stood on his porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of red and gold. His body still ached sometimes, phantom pains from the trials. The scars on his chest and arms would never fully fade. But he didn't mind. They were reminders of what he'd learned, what he'd endured, what he'd become. Claire joined him, slipping her hand into his. Thinking about the trials? Always. In some way, they changed everything. Changed you mean? Yeah. I was so sure I knew what I was doing building this ranch. But I didn't know anything. I didn't understand that the land was already claimed, already sacred to people who'd been here for centuries. I thought empty land meant unclaimed land. Most people still think that way. I know. That's why this matters. What we're building here, this peace, it's fragile. It could fall apart in a day if the wrong people push hard enough. But it's real. And it's showing other people that there's another way. Lightning bolts appeared from the growing darkness, moving silently as always. Jake had learned to sense his approach, a skill the Apache warrior found amusing. Walks through fire, Lightning bolts greeted him. I came to tell you the elders wish to speak with you tomorrow. There is a matter requiring your wisdom. My wisdom? Jake smiled. 6 months ago, I was the most ignorant man in the territory, and now you are the man who walked through fire and lived. Who was buried in sacred earth and emerged? Who dove from the falls and survived? Your wisdom was earned through suffering. That makes it valuable. After Lightning bolts left, Claire squeezed Jake's hand. You know, when you rode off with them that day, I was certain I'd never see you again. I wasn't sure either, but you went anyway. I didn't have a choice. Not really. Pete was shot. You were in danger. The ranch was burning, and the Apache had a legitimate grievance. I had to answer for it, even if I didn't know I'd done anything wrong. That's what makes you different from men like Frank Hudson. You take responsibility. You face consequences. Jake thought about the fire, how it had felt to walk through flames. The earth, how it had felt to be buried alive. The water, how it had felt to fall through empty air. Each trial had stripped away something, revealed something, transformed something. He wasn't the same man anymore. Couldn't be, after everything he'd seen and felt. The Apache believed that some men are chosen by the spirits for particular purposes, Jake said. I don't know if I believe that, but I know that what happened changed me. Gave me a purpose I didn't have before. I thought my purpose was just to build a ranch, raise cattle, make a living. But it's bigger than that now. It's about building bridges, about helping people understand each other. That's a heavy burden. Maybe, but it's mine to carry, just like these scars. They stood together in the darkness, watching stars emerge in the vast sky above. Somewhere out in the desert, Apache families gathered around their fires. Somewhere behind them, other ranchers worked their land, most trying to do right by their neighbors. The world was complicated, full of competing claims and ancient grievances, but here, in this small corner of the territory, something new was growing. Fragile, but real. Jake Morrison, who'd been reborn as Walks Through Fire, would spend the rest of his life protecting that fragile peace, not with guns or treaties alone, but with understanding, with respect, with the wisdom earned through fire and earth and water. He'd been tested and found worthy. Now came the real work of proving himself worthy every single day. It was a trial that would never end, but unlike the Apache trials, this one he faced willingly, gladly even, because he'd learned the most important lesson of all. The land didn't need him to conquer it. It needed him to serve it, to honor it, to live in balance with all the others who called it home. And that was a purpose worth any amount of suffering. The morning brought lightning bolts back to the ranch with a request that Jake had been half expecting. The elders wished to establish formal council, representatives from our people and yours, meeting regularly to resolve disputes before they become violence. I want you to lead the settlers' side. Jake had anticipated this, but felt the weight of it nonetheless. That's a lot of trust they're placing in me. You earned it. Few white men would have survived the trials. Fewer still would have learned from them. The elders see you as honest, someone who respects our ways while representing your people fairly. Over the next year, the council met monthly, rotating between the Apache village and various ranch houses. Disputes were settled over shared meals instead of through gunfire. Boundaries were respected, sacred sites were protected. It wasn't perfect. Tensions still flared occasionally, but the framework held. Frank Hudson finally overplayed his hand, attempting to file false claims on land that included Apache burial grounds. Jake and Lightning Bolts presented evidence together before the territorial judge, exposing Hudson's schemes. The judge ruled against Hudson and imposed fines heavy enough to cripple his operation. Hudson left the territory shortly after, selling his ranch to a Quaker family who wanted to farm in peace. Claire and Jake were married in a ceremony that blended both cultures. An Apache elder blessed their union alongside the circuit preacher. Warriors and ranchers celebrated together, their children playing without the fear and hatred that had divided previous generations. Pete recovered fully and eventually married the Apache woman who'd first tended Jake's wounds. Their union became another symbol of the growing peace, proof that the two peoples could build something together rather than simply coexisting. Years passed. The barn Jake rebuilt stood strong. His cattle grazed carefully marked land, never straying onto sacred ground. The territorial governor's treaties were formalized, creating the first legally protected Native American sacred sites in that part of the territory. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to compensate for everything that had been taken, but it was something, a start. Jake's children grew up speaking both English and Apache. They learned to respect the spirits in the earth and the importance of balance. They learned their father's story, not as adventure but as lesson. The trials he'd endured became family legend, passed down as teaching about the cost of ignorance and the value of understanding. Lightning Bolts grew old alongside Jake, the two men becoming elders themselves, counseling younger generations on both sides about the importance of peace. When Lightning Bolts finally passed, Jake was there, holding his friend's hand as his spirit made its journey. The entire Apache village mourned, and so did the ranching community. He was buried with full honors in the sacred ground he'd spent his life protecting. Jake lived to see his grandchildren, to watch the territory become a state, to witness changes both good and troubling. Some of the old hatreds never died, and new conflicts arose as more settlers pushed west. But in his corner of the land, the peace held. The council continued. The sacred grounds remained protected. On his final day, very old now and tired, Jake sat on his porch, watching the sunset one last time. His body was failing, but his mind remained sharp. He thought about that morning so many years ago when arrows had whistled past his head, when his world had exploded into chaos and fire. He thought about walking through flames, being buried alive, diving from the sacred falls. He thought about the transformation those trials had wrought. Claire, equally old but still beautiful to him, sat beside him, holding his hand. "Any regrets?" she asked. Jake considered the question carefully. His life had been harder than it might have been, taking on the burden of being a bridge between two peoples. He'd made enemies among both whites and Apache who wanted simpler solutions. He'd sacrificed personal wealth and ease for the sake of peace. No, he said finally. No regrets. The trials made me who I needed to be. Showed me what I couldn't see before. Everything that came after, good and bad, grew from that understanding. That night, Jake Morrison, known as Walks Through Fire, died peacefully in his sleep. The Apache held a ceremony for him in the sacred ground where he'd once been buried, an honor reserved for their greatest warriors. Ranchers and settlers traveled from across the state for his funeral, each with stories of his fairness, his wisdom, his unfailing commitment to peace. They buried him on his own land, facing east toward the sunrise, in sight of the sacred grounds he'd helped protect. The marker on his grave bore his name in both English and Apache. Warriors and cowboys stood together at his graveside, united in their respect for a man who'd walked through fire and emerged transformed. The council he'd helped establish continued without him. The peace he'd built endured. The sacred grounds remained protected. His children and grandchildren carried on his work, maintaining the bridges he'd constructed. It wasn't the legacy he'd imagined when he first came to the territory as a young man seeking his fortune. It was better. Because Jake Morrison had learned what few men ever do, that true strength comes not from conquering the land or the people on it, but from understanding your place within the larger circle of existence. That honor matters more than wealth. That respect costs nothing but means everything. That sometimes the greatest trial is simply learning to see the world through different eyes. The fire had purified him. The earth had taught him. The water had transformed him. And the life he'd lived afterward had justified all the suffering, all the fear, all the pain. He'd been bound by flame and freed by it. He'd stood trial and emerged not just alive, but truly living. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.